Counselor.
Budget and Director and former City Council President, Barry LaPasse.
Nice to
Thank
see
you
you.
for coming down
You're very welcome, anytime.
this evening. So we're going to start with the budget update.
Yes, this is our quarterly update. A little late, but not bad. With your permission, I have a whole laundry list of items that I'd like to go through that I think will cover just about all the issues that councils might have on their mind regarding the budget. Obviously, if you have any other questions that I haven't addressed, please feel free to, let me know, and I'll try to answer them as best I can.
Okay, thank you.
All right, good. A couple of housekeeping items first. I know that Council, you had asked for any questions ahead of time. I did get a couple of questions. I think one was on crossing guards. I think the question was basically if the mayor is looking for a supplemental appropriation for the crossing guards, is there a deduct for the time that the 8 crossing guards were not at work? And the answer is yes. It's very small. It's about $618.40. That represents 8 crossing guards for the 2 days that they were not on the job, which is September 1st and September 2nd. So if you wanted to deduct anything, it would be the $618.40, which would bring the supplemental appropriation down to $60,247.77. Speaking of supplemental appropriations, I know another question came about what is a supplemental appropriation? And if you'd like, I'd like to address that. If not, I can go right into the other stuff.
I would, because I had explained it to the council during one of the meetings, but I don't know who was listening. So if you want to further expound upon that, that would be great.
Be happy to. So a supplemental appropriation to the budget can occur in basically one of 2 ways. Number one, if the city received or reasonably expects to receive an unexpected additional source of revenue after the budget was passed. So that's one source of a supplemental appropriation. The second one is from funds that were included in an approved budget but cut by the council. And supplemental appropriations are authorized under Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 32, Paragraph 2. So by way of example, the mayor, of course, provided the balanced budget to the council. The council cut $259,849.27. The mayor can then ask the council for a supplemental appropriation from those cut funds. Another example is if before the tax rate is set, local receipts or new growth are coming in or expected to come in higher than projected. Those then become an additional funding source from which a supplemental appropriation can be made. So those are basically the 2 sources of supplemental appropriations. Any questions on that?
No, the first one you said was an additional funding source. What was the number one? You said the approved by budget, the cut by
additional
council.
revenue. So
additional revenue.
Yeah.
Okay. Jeremy, did you have a question?
Yeah. So I think I've heard some concerns from other counselors that they're under the impression that we have motions before us asking for money from the supplemental appropriation for more money than is actually in that account. I don't know if that's correct or not, but I was wondering if you could expunge upon that a little.
Expunge?
That's a new word I made up.
Yes. Well,
Yeah. It's like
I think
a
I
sponge.
know what it means. So yes,
put it outwards.
I can expunge.
Yeah, there you go.
That's true. That's an accurate statement that council has before it pending motions. It's not approved.
Correct.
And that's a very important distinction. What you've already approved is $250,057.41. What you have before you would, if you approved it, would leave a deficit of $25,724.52. That's not unprecedented. The council has approved supplemental appropriations without an identified funding source in past years. In this case, before the tax rate is set, there may be additional funding sources like I just talked about. One of them might be projected local receipts coming in higher than projected. Another funding source could be new growth is certified at a higher amount than what was carried in the budget. What was carried in the budget was $700,000 for new growth. That's just an estimate that the assessor gives to us as we prepare the budget. When he puts a fine pencil to it, a sharp pencil to it, and submits it to the Department of Revenue, it usually is a different number. Most often, it's a higher number. So that's another funding source that would certainly cover this $25,724 deficit.
Now, can you deficit spend from a supplemental account?
Yes, so as long as you identify you have to, by the time the tax rate is set, you have to identify what the funding source is.
And is that considered a best practice?
It happens all the time. Because
Is it ideal?
well, I think an ideal is to cover the costs of expenses that need to be covered. So if, again, the projected revenues, or in this case, new growth is expected to come in, and you talk to the assessor, he seems to think it is, then a $25,000 deficit is nothing.
Now, what would the purpose be to fund different accounts from the supplemental appropriation rather than from the reserve fund for transfer?
Well, in this case, since the council cut $259,849.27, that's the logical first place to go. After that would be either the reserve fund for transfer or after a free cash is certified.
So do you see the supplemental account and the reserve fund for transfer as like being able to like cover for one another? So we spend supplemental funds on the light pole, which was something, but then if we need more money for something that was previously cut, that can come from the reserve fund for transfer, like they can cover each
I think
other?
for the most part, the mayor tried to target items that were actually cut from the budget to the supplemental appropriation of $259,000. I think he tried to match those up. I don't think he did exactly, but what we try to do is match the supplemental appropriations up with an identifiable funding source, which in this case was the cuts. All right.
And that's for a temporary period.
Yes, of course. Before the
Because-
tax rate is set, we all have to be COCO, so.
Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So, Barry, as far as the supplemental appropriation, again, this is something that it's very customary, it's not only here, but it's everywhere. But the key is we can do a deficit, but when we do the tax recap, which is coming up in the next several weeks, we have to clear it at
Absolutely.
that time.
We have to be in balance, yes.
It's, in a way, could it be compared with like with the snow budget? Where, by that, what I mean is, that's one of the few accounts where we can go into a deficit, but we have to clear it when we come around, to set the budget for the coming year. So in other words, we know, we run into a deficit, but we have to move funds over to take care of it. I mean, with a big sum a few years ago, the state gave us another means of doing that. But the point being that you can run a deficit, but you have to clear it by a certain time.
The difference, though, is that in a supplemental appropriation, the deficits aren't usually very big at all.
Right.
I mean, nothing compared to the snow deficit.
Right, exactly.
Here, 25,000 is really nothing.
Right.
You won't see deficit spending in the supplemental appropriation for six-figure items. You simply won't see that unless
Okay.
we've identified where that six-figure item is coming from.
Okay, thank you.
No. Can I ask someone?
Yes.
So what happens if we deficit spend the supplemental fund and then that money is not realized
Then we would have to cut the budget.
midway through the year?
Yep. I mean, that's assuming we had nothing left in the reserve fund, nothing left in free cash.
So then the reserve fund would go to cover that.
Oh, yeah.
So that was kind of my question before.
Oh, I'm sorry.
They
I
can
misunderstood.
cover. It's like a good shell game where this can cover this, and then if we're out of reserve fund, we can use, or if we're out of supplemental fund, we can use the reserve fund to cover the reserve fund
Right,
deficit.
so in this case, right now, that if you approve all the mayor's supplemental appropriations, including the restoration of his mayor's salary line item, then you would have a deficit of $25,000 in the supplemental appropriation. If by chance, local receipts could not be raised, if by chance we came in below or at new growth that we carried in the budget, which is highly unlikely, then yes, we would have to cover that with another funding source,
Okay.
such as the reserve fund for transfer or the free cash.
And that would be easy because we
Yes.
know how much money's in there,
Well, we don't know how much is free cash yet.
but we know reserve fund for transfer.
Absolutely.
Okay. Cool.
So, long story short.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. So now if I could move on to the general government expenditures from July 1st through September 30th. That's 25% first quarter. So you would think that items should be tracking around 25%, which they are. There are a couple items on our watch list, though. One of them is elections. As you know, reduction in force in the elections office was extended to November 28th of 2016, and the additional funds for this extension was already approved by your honorable body on September 20th. A request, I believe, to fund additional coverage for the elections office will be presented shortly. Early elections and so forth, so early voting. So you can expect that from the mayor. The second item is the clerk's office. A reduction in force in the clerk's office was also extended by approximately 13 weeks. A request to fund this additional coverage will also be presented to you shortly. Moving on to local receipts, which are, oh, sorry.
Mr. Klass, could you just tell me the number of weeks the elections office was extended? You said it, but I didn't catch it.
It's to November 28th.
Okay.
However many weeks that is. Local receipts, which we just kind of touched upon as we were talking about supplemental appropriations, again through September 30th of 2016. Overall, most categories of revenue in the local receipts are either meeting expectations or are within acceptable variations of the projections. There is, however, one item on our watch list, and that's building permit revenue. It's down 29% over FY16. So that's something that we're going to keep an eye on.
Barry? Might that have something to do with the reduction in the building department and
No.
the staff?
No, I mean, people, what it has to do with the number of permits that are being purchased. So people don't, I guess another way of saying it, people don't decide not to pull a building permit because there's a 1.5 clerks in the office.
I think what I heard was that maybe the clerks there aren't enough to be able to help everyone who wants to pull a permit. So people are there to pull permits. There's no one to help them.
That's not the
They
case.
get turned away. That's not true.
No.
Okay.
Mr. Cooper?
So, along that line, Barry, what I heard, and I think you just said that's not the case, was that not necessarily related to the revenue, but that there was a decline in the response time, and that's what I heard, but I think you just said that that's not the case. So that there's not a stack of building permits waiting to go through the process.
No, because when you file a building permit, you pay.
Right.
So even if you paid and it sits on
And
it,
waiting.
it's still
You've already
paid.
paid,
You're still
yeah.
paid.
Thank you for that clarification. That's helpful.
Barry, do you have you gotten any firm figures in terms of the number of building permits?
I have not. I just track the revenue.
And also, if you do get them, I'd be curious if this is tracking what we normally see, because I know normally if you're gonna be building an addition or a house or whatever, you tend to sometimes pull the permits sometime during the winter, late winter, so when you hit the spring and the good weather, you can do it. We're now heading into the other time of year. So usually, do we normally see more permits at the beginning of the year and less is, like in the first 2 quarters of the year,
Well, again, my comparison is first quarter this year compared to first quarter last year. So however many permits were pulled last year for the same period of time, we're down, what did I say, 29%?
29%.
29%.
29, yeah, 29%.
29.
So, yeah, but I'll be happy to check on the number of
Okay,
permits that
thank
have
you.
been pulled. Sure,
Barry,
sure.
do you think that what's been going on with the budget and with the school systems has disincentivized people from developing in the city?
Not at all. No. Not at all. People build because they have the ability to build, the opportunity to build, the cash to build. We see it all the time. That's.
So where are we failing? How can we help them do that more?
I don't think we're failing. I think that the decline in the building permits is just a reflection of the spike that we had last year.
That's what I was gonna ask you, is before you guys said there was such a
Last year, we
growth
came in
the
way over
permits.
projection, so that, we had a nice spike. It happens. Could be a large project going into South Attleboro, could be, a car dealership, could be a lot of things that caused that to spike up. Again, I wasn't tracking the number of permits, I was tracking the revenue. So big project equals big,
Large money.
big permit fee.
Okay. So you could have a 200% spike, but then have a 29% decline of that 200 of the spike.
You could have, well, stated another way, you could have you know, a new ice rink going in, that in 2016 is gonna be a big building permit that's gonna spike the revenue. And so when you don't have that big ice rink going in FY17, it's gonna be like this. It's gonna look like it's a decline, but it's only a decline from last year's spike.
So to look over the trends of.
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
Mr. Cooper?
I'm all set, thank you, he
Okay,
answered it.
Mr. Delizio, Mr. Blair?
Those,
Mr.
so,
Delizio?
no, go ahead, eight, a beauty before eight.
You got them on both counts.
Wow. So, safe to say that what we're seeing is a market correction in terms of the building.
When I say it's on our watch list, it's just because I compare 16 to 17. It's
Sure.
not a reflection that, oh my God, time to scramble. It might be because there was a spike in a project at this time last year.
Yep.
So I'm not by any means concerned. It's just an observation that we have for our watch list. That's all.
Sure, if I can follow up.
Yes.
So, and I understand that, I certainly do, but so my question becomes, what happens if we stay on this trajectory of, you know, if we're not able to make up that 29%, if that, if the revenues continue to decline as we go forward, where does that put us?
Sure, we see it all the time. In your budget books, you'll see a breakdown of all of our local receipts.
Yep.
Permits, fees, excise tax, everything. Sometimes that particular line item, excise tax, comes in higher than projected, but sometimes permits come in lower than projected.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, what DOR really cares about is that the sum total of all of those local receipts are at or more than what you projected. So you can have some line items
Some
over.
fluctuation?
Right,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
That peak last year, Barry, more than likely was, related to the shopping plaza and
It could be the ice rink, could be the shopping, it could be a lot of things. It could
Yeah.
just be,
Surrounds building.
Sure.
We did have a spike last year where commercial, we had quite a bit of commercial growth, I think, last year.
Right.
That isn't of the norm. And from reading the papers today, they're gonna have a housing spike in my neighborhood.
well, I don't know, that's recreation.
Locust.
That's, I thought that was,
They have to
reserved for
pay-
recreation.
They have to pay back something, but
I don't
they
think that's
can.
61A, I think that has to be, I don't know,
Oh,
I think there's
alright.
a recreation
I
restriction
think the
on it.
owners are looking at how,
I'm sure of it.
Okay,
Oh, sorry.
my apologies.
Hi, Counselor. So now, moving on to the year-to-date revenue for the enterprises. Wastewater revenue, we're at $2.4 million collected as of September 30th. We were $2.3 million collected in FY16, same period. For water, we're $1.9 million collected. And last year at the same time, we were $1.8 million collected. Both of those are within wastewater, we're 24.4% collected at the 25% interval, that's good. And water, we're 25.7% collected. Again, we're at the 25% interval, that's also good. However, on the watch list, we will be watching water and wastewater revenue in the next quarter, because that's when most likely we're gonna see the results of the water ban. So we're gonna have to keep a close eye on that.
Jeremy?
Yeah, I have a policy question. So currently, the way that water's billed is it's based on the date of the billing cycle. And I've been talking to Deb Gould, I believe there'll be new business on Tuesday, to change that to a prorated system, which I know might have some effect on the future budget. But proration, I think, to many of the counselors sounds a little fairer. That way, if you live 3 blocks away from me, you're not paying the higher rate for all 3 months, and I'm not paying the lower rate for all 3 months. Would the administration be supportive of a prorated water enterprise billing system?
So I'm glad you asked that question, because a prorated system actually costs the ratepayer more. Not a lot more, but more. And that's because in order to prorate it, the rate has to be actually higher in the new fiscal year than it normally would be.
At one time,
Yep.
when you change it.
So what I did is I created a spreadsheet. I actually did it for one of the councils, who I won't name, that lives in District 3. So, District 3, which is the same as District 1, the first usage period, the first bill date is August 4th, 2016. The usage period is May 1st through July 31st. Let's just say that this council used 3,000 cubic feet of water. at the old rate, which is $4.47, that would be 2 months at that rate, okay? That would be $139.50.
Barry, I think we understand how it works.
Okay.
It's the principle of, do you agree with the fairness principle of prorating, even if it does result in a slight one-time increase in
It's
the
not
water
one
rate?
time, that's what I'm trying to say, Counselor.
It is, because once you set that, then the fiscal system is in place for it to be prorated in the future.
Now, because in order to raise the amount of money you need to cover the usage, you have to artificially raise the rate of the year that you're in. That's what I'm trying to explain. I won't go through the entire spreadsheet, but in this example, the person would pay an additional 31 cents. Not huge money, but on that kind of a prorated system, the ratepayer is actually paying more money than they normally would.
It depends on the ratepayer and what district they're in.
No, it depends, no, because District 5, you'd have 3 months at the old rate. District 3, which is the same as District 1, would have 2. District 4, which is the same as District 2, would have 1. Those.
So one person's paying the new rate for 1 month, and one person's paying the new rate for 2 months. So that's unfair.
Right, so the one that's paying it for 1 month would pay an extra $11.07. The example I just gave you with the 31 cents was District 3, and that would be paying the lower amount for 2 months. So the less months you pay at the lower rate, the more you're gonna pay at the end of the day. So.
Yes.
All right,
Yeah,
so,
that's how it works. But so, right now, some people, if they get billed at a certain time and we change the rate, have to pay all 3 months at the new rate, even though they use some of the water at the old rate. And what I think lots of us think is that that might be unfair, because when they were using the water, it was at a lower rate some of the time. So say for one of the months. Then when they used 2 months of the water, it was at the higher rate. So they shouldn't be billed for 3 months at the higher rate. They should be billed for 2 months at the
in
higher
order to
rate.
cover that, so.
You have to slightly increase the water rate.
Correct, and when we slightly increase the water rate for the 9 or 10 or 11 months that they're paying at the slightly higher amount, when you tally the entire amount that they've paid for the fiscal year, what I am telling you is that the ratepayer will end up paying more than if they just paid on a rate that began without a phase-in, so.
But do you see a problem with some people? So the same 3 months, some people pay 2 months at a higher rate and 1 month at a low rate. Some people pay 2 months at a low rate, 1 month at a high rate. Do you see like an impropriety in that?
I think that the numbers don't play that out.
But it's true. What I'm saying is true. That's how it currently works.
Over the course of the year,
Nope, just right when we change the water rate. Those are the only 3 months that we need to prorate, because that's the only time it's going to step up and change. So, but right now under our current system, some people pay more months at the higher rate than others, and that would not be a fair system.
well, I don't know about that. I think that you'd have to, I don't know. What I do know is that if you went back to a phased-in approach, everyone pays more than they would have.
Well, everyone pays what they should fairly. If you were,
No, I'm saying everyone would pay more if you used a phased-in than if you just use a rate that began on July 1st.
so no, I want a rate at July 1st, and then I want it prorated so that the water you use before July 1st, you pay the old water rate, and the
Right.
water you use after. So I don't want it like kind of phased in, I just want it prorated. And that would seem to be most fair. Like, maybe could you send a memo around explaining
Well, I
your,
think Deb Gould has done a memo, and I think
that supported it?
well, actually, I think what she said in the memo is also important to keep in mind that phasing in the rate could also mean a greater increase to the rate that may be needed to ensure balanced budget is presented.
Right, because you have to cover, so now,
Right,
instead of
so-
me paying 3 months at the higher rate when I use the water at the lower rate, now you're gonna charge me appropriately at the lower rate. So there will be some decreased revenue that you would have to compensate for out of the fairness to the person who's paying
So there would
3
be a
months at the higher
water
rate.
for everybody.
Right, so would the administration be supportive of a prorated
I don't think the
system?
administration would be in favor of a higher rate than's necessary.
Well, I don't think anyone would, but would they be
But
in
that's what's
favor
gonna
of a
happen.
fairer billing system?
Well, again, I'll let the mayor speak to that, but I can tell you that we've looked at the phasing in. approach, and it results in a higher water rate for everybody, and I don't think that that's fair.
Barry, were you on the council when the enterprises were built? Was that before you?
I'm not,
Were you, Frank?
No, it was before.
That was before you too?
I
I
think it
wanna
was, I
say,
think it was before we were on the
90s?
planning board.
Was it late nineties?
Yeah, it's over 20 years. I
Well,
think that water department,
Yeah.
that building down there is 22, 23 years in running.
Yeah,
That's all.
so no, I wasn't on the
Yeah, I
council.
was gonna see if the Genesis, but
No.
that was before your time.
Well,
I
I mean,
didn't
the
know how long ago
gen,
you were on.
yeah, I mean, obviously, the theory behind an enterprise is you want a self-sustaining, rate-based enterprise system as opposed to using, just general government funds to cover the cost of a utility. Same thing with kind of the trash, that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you.
So if I could move on to capital projects. I'm gonna break capital projects into projects that are now underway or near completion, and then capital projects that are gonna be looked upon in FY17. So projects that are now underway or near completion, begin with the Riverfront Drive and Riverfront Park. The construction for those projects is proceeding in due course. Completion of those projects is expected by June of 2017. The Hoppin Hill Dam repair, I don't know if you've had a chance to go out to Hoppin Hill, but it's quite a sight. Your body authorized $1.5 million in borrowing back in 2014. We also received a state grant in the amount of $160,000. The construction costs were about $995,000, and it was done by Aqualine. In the end, we only had to borrow about $1,097,973, which is wonderful. And right now, before the project can be closed out, we're just waiting for some grass to grow over there to secure the embankment. The next project that is near completion is the water storage building and stormwater improvement project. I don't know if anyone's had a chance to go down to the water storage building. It's came out beautiful. We used $94,000 from retained earnings for the design and the peer review costs. And then the council authorized $4.35 million. The construction of the building was overseen by the MBC and is now completed. It was done by Construction Dynamics. It's good to say the project was completed on time and under budget, which is always wonderful. But there is another component to that project, and that's the stormwater improvements. To satisfy DEP's requests, we're gonna do some stormwater improvements that are in that watershed area. The design of those stormwater improvements are nearing completion. The construction estimate for those stormwater improvements is about $300,000. And that's already in the council's loan authorization. The Oak Hill tank, $153,000 from retained earnings was used for the design by GZA. $2.67 million was authorized by your honorable body for construction. The low bidder was Zarnis at $1.6 million. Again, we'll be able to borrow less than the authorization, which is always a good thing. Some capital projects that are coming up in 2017. In wastewater, we have the sludge landfill. Now, the sludge landfill can be found on page 112 of your CIP book. And the new landfill was approved in the council's own CIP vote, which I think occurred on May 17th, for $3.7 million. The final design of the storage building was approved by the MBC. The first bid was just for the sludge landfill in the storage building combined. The results, however, were unacceptable. The lowest bid was $4 million. So we rejected that. So to save money on borrowing costs, we'll be combining 4 interconnected projects. One is the new sludge landfill, and if anyone doesn't know where this is going, if you look at the dog park, not the animal shelter, the dog park, it's to the right of the dog park in the back. It's nice to know that before they approved that site, they had to do an archaeological survey, and they found a nice arrowhead point, which I have in my office. The Historical Commission requires me to hang it in a public place, so it's in my office if you want to see it. It's kind of neat. Anyways, so that's where the new sludge landfill is going. The storage and, the second interconnected project is the storage building and the equipment, Caterpillar tractor, a dump truck, so forth. The third component is the capping of the existing landfill. We have to cap the existing landfill, which is across Pond Street North, if you know where that is. And then the fourth piece of it is the demolition of the old wastewater treatment plant, which is right next to the animal shelter. You've seen it there, it's kind of behind a bunch of bushes, and we just had some hazardous waste issue over there. So those are the four interconnected projects that we want to combine for borrowing purposes. The bids for the new landfill were opened on October 6th, and that was $1.879 million was the low bidded, a company called Maverick Construction. That company is being vetted now by CDM. We're going to be carrying a contingency of 10% and other costs to be expected about $197,000. So that's the new landfill cost. The bid for the storage garage and the fueling station are going to be going out on the street in November. The estimated cost for that piece is $1.61 million, which includes a 10% contingency, and the equipment I talked about earlier is estimated to be about $680,000. The next component is the bid for the capping of the existing landfill and the demolition of the old wastewater plant. Again, those specifications are now being worked on. The engineer's estimate for those is $2.5 million, which includes a $585,000 or 10% contingency. And then the resident engineering to oversee the construction is estimated to be about $445,000. So if you've been following these numbers, they all add up to about $7.31 million, which for borrowing purposes, we would round to $7.4 million. That's a big number. The annual debt service on that borrowing would be about $444,000 for 25 years. We will have the capacity to handle this debt service in FY18 because other debt is falling off in the wastewater department, so that's the good news. In the water department, we have the Luther pump station. If anyone has ever taken a tour of our watershed areas, you'll know that the Luther pump house pumps water up to Manchester Reservoir. Manchester Reservoir doesn't have any real natural water sources. There's a little stream that comes down, I think, from 295, but that's pretty much it. So when we get water down from Luther, we can pump it up into Manchester and store it in there. So the Luther pump house, the pump station needs work. We broke it down into two phases. Both of these phases were approved by the CIP vote of the council on May 17th. So phase 1A is the design, and that's on page 114 of your CIP book. $56,000 of design costs were approved by the council on December 22nd, 2015. It requires, the scope is replacing an expansion tank, a 42-inch coupling spool and reline tee, miscellaneous rigging and fittings, a 16-inch butterfly valve, and a 48-inch butterfly valve, flange piping, and miscellaneous piping. Don't ask me what some of that stuff is. It's needed. So that phase 1A is the design of these things. Phase 1B is the actual construction of it, and that's on page 115 of your CIP. The engineer's estimate for the construction is $650,000, which includes a 10% or $65,000 contingency. Now, phase 2A of the Luther pump station is, again, design. It's on page 115 of your CIP. That's for the rehabilitation of the high lift pumps, variable frequency drives, installing an emergency generator, associated electrical work, as well as some dam and building upgrades. The design for phase 2A was $177,900, which was approved by the council on May 31st. Phase 2B construction, which is on page 116 of your CIP, is estimated to be $1.695 million. That includes a contingency of about $249,000. So the grand total of phases 1 and 2 for the Luther pump house is $2.345 million. Along with that, the engineer is suggesting a dike rehabilitation at the Luther pump house for $150,000. So the grand total of those is $2.495 million. And so I can't stress enough how important the Luther Pump House is to our water system, because again, Manchester doesn't receive any natural water except for rainwater and a little bit of runoff. So we need to have a pump house that's operating efficiently to pump water up when we can. The next item in the water department is the Blake's Pond Dam replacement. Now, for those of you that don't know where Blake's Pond Dam is, it's in Mansfield. It's between Miramichi and the Wading River filter beds. And what Blake's Pond Dam does, it's right above the filter beds on the Wading River. That allows the city to grab water from the Wading River and filter it through the filter beds in Mansfield. The water filters down into it, pumped out, cleaned, and enters our water system. So Blake's Pond Dam is very important to our water resource. And again, that's in two phases. Phase one is the design. That's on page 119 of your CIP. The $132,000 of design costs were approved by your honorable body on May 31st. Phase two is the construction, page 121 of your CIP. The engineer's estimate for the construction is $720,000, which includes a $120,000 contingency. The next item in the water department is the Pawtucket Water Supply Board intermunicipal connection. Now, this is in South Attleboro on Ralco Way, Turner Street, and River Street. It's in your CIP books in the status report on page 129. This connection, which we've been working on for over a year, just with the Pawtucket Water Supply Board, will allow the city of Attleboro to tie into the Pawtucket Water Supply Board's water in times of severe drought, like the 2 years that we've had of severe droughts. In essence, though, we will be building a mini water plant, just sort of like we do in Mansfield. And the estimated time of completion is April of 2017. The engineer's estimate is design, permitting, bidding, construction, and contingency is $1.752 million.
Heather?
Thank you. Again, my apologies for being a little bit late, and I think that I sit here and I think I know the answer to this question, but when we bond for water or wastewater department improvements, do the enterprise funds pay for that?
Yes,
Thank
they
you.
do. Yep.
I just
Good
want to
question. No, that's a good question.
reiterate that, but thank you.
I'd like to say that that's it for the water department, but literally today, we got a memo from Mr. Kennedy, who informed us that while they were doing some work on the South Main Street Bridge, they realized that for some time now, insulation has been falling from the water main that spans that bridge and making contact with 25,000 volt wires, which is not a good thing. So the contractors that are doing the work on the bridge contacted the water department, told them about it. The water department immediately reacted and got a engineer out there to give us a quote for the work. The quote to replace 250 feet of the insulation is about $264,700.
So my bridge isn't opening this week? No. It's supposed to open this week.
It still might, I mean,
Okay.
So that will have to be addressed sooner rather than later. So Mr. Kennedy is gonna be working with our capital projects administrator to develop a scope of work, and we'll most likely have to go out to bid for that. But I just wanted you folks to be aware that that's something that literally just came up. What we'd like to do is we'd like to lump all these water projects into one loan authorization to save on borrowing costs. Our plan is to send those requests down within the next several weeks, and we will plan to have temporary borrowing for FY 18, and then go long-term with the borrowing in FY 19 when more debt will be falling off the water department, so that we won't have to have an impact on the rate.
Okay, with the amortization, if it was broken down into separate projects, and if we're lumping it together, even when we've done it before, certain projects, we've kind of put things together. It makes sense, you're saying, to lump them all together, not to have them
Just for
broken?
borrowing purposes.
For the borrowing.
Because every time we
purposes.
borrow, we have to get a lawyer, we have to get borrowing costs that are involved. So a lump
Okay.
sum is, you save that.
Cause I know that'd be a question that's.
Yeah, no, it's a good question.
Okay, Heather?
Thank you. I guess my question, is it possible for us to see what's fallen off, how much has fallen off?
Sure.
If there a way for you to send us a spreadsheet over the
Yeah,
course
of
of the
course,
next,
yeah.
that would be really helpful,
Yep.
just so when we're making those kinds of decisions, I like to be able to see it and touch it and,
Understand.
thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the questions I had too is the interest, say the interest that we're paying
Sure.
broken down to.
Yeah, we're, again, our bond rating is very good, so that results in lower interest, usually 1-2%, somewhere in that area.
Okay.
If I could now go into school projects. The Attleboro High School feasibility study, the $1.2 million was approved by your honorable body back in October of 2015 and endorsed by the school committee as well. The references to this project can be found in the CIP book at page 106 and 107 and 128. So we're in the feasibility study phase of the MSBA project. That means that through the school building committee, which meets regularly, probably once a month at least, on a Wednesday night at room 17080 at the high school, so please feel free to join us. During the feasibility study, the SBC, on behalf of the district, collaborates with the MSBA to do basically 5 things. Generate an initial space summary based upon the district's educational needs. Number 2, document existing conditions at the Attleboro High School. Number 3, establish design parameters. Number 4, develop and evaluate preliminary and final alternatives. And number 5, it recommends the most cost-effective and educationally appropriate solution to the MSBA Board of Directors. So those are the 5 things that we need to focus on during this feasibility stage. The MSBA Board of Directors must approve the preferred solution for a project before the preferred solution may advance into the schematic design phase. So where are we? The SBC is currently in the preliminary design phase of the feasibility study, and the 2 major tasks that are being worked on. Number 1, the educational program. Although the school committee has already adopted the Attleboro Public School Strategic Plan and Vision in 2020, the MSBA also requires the adoption of an educational plan. The educational plan generally includes a statement of the teaching philosophy and methods, a thorough, in-depth explanation of the district's curriculum goals, and objectives of the program elements associated with the high school. I'm told a working draft of this educational plan has been or will soon be presented to the school committee for their review and comment. Moreover, on September 20th, 21st, and 23rd, we held a vision workshop. Councilor Blair was there. Councilor Hall was also there. There were about 50 other people that participated, and certainly on behalf of the mayor, I would like to thank all those people that gave up those 3 days. It was quite a commitment, but I think it was worth it. You think so? And Sensata was great. They hosted all 3 days. They fed us well, which was nice.
Very well.
Sebastian.
What's that?
His name's the chef.
Sebastian?
Sebastian.
Oh, you did an awesome job. The results of that workshop, that visioning workshop, will be presented by Frank Locker, who was our educational consultant, at the next SBC meeting, which is November 2nd, again at 17080 at the high school. That's at 5:30. And most likely, the results of that visioning workshop will be somehow incorporated into the educational plan that will ultimately be approved by the school committee. The second task that we're working on now is documenting the existing conditions at the high school. So our design of Castle Booze is nearing its completion of this existing conditions. It basically goes through the entire high school, does some selective demolition, peeks behind the walls and the ceilings all over the place. And their report is also due to the SBC on November 2nd, so that's going to be a very important SBC meeting. Some other key dates that are important for the feasibility study. March 23rd of 2017. That's when the preliminary design program is due to the MSBA. That's the ed plan, the space summary, the evaluation of existing conditions, that sort of thing. June 29th, 2017, a preferred solution schematic report is due to the MSBA. That's when the district, the MSBA, decides what's our preferred solution. Is our preferred solution to build a new high school? Is it to renovate the old high school? Is it a combination of the two? August 23rd, 2017 through November 9th of 2017. That's when the district needs to develop what's called a robust schematic design. And that includes a project scope and budget. That needs to be submitted to the MSBA by November 9th of 2017. December 13th of 2017 is when the MSBA approves the district's schematic design. And that's as far as our $1.2 million takes us. That's the end of the $1.2 million. After that, it's all up to the district. What do we want to do? And that's where we've talked about the debt exclusion. So if necessary, the debt exclusion would be expected in or about February of 2018. And by the way, the debt exclusion was first brought up in a Sun Chronicle editorial on April 19th of 2004, 12 years ago. I know it because I was quoted in it. So that's the Attleboro High School feasibility study in a nutshell.
Jen.
So my question, I appreciate the administration's commitment to the feasibility study. I think lots of us are on board. But something I've heard a lot is, you know, it's nice to have a beautiful building, great infrastructure, and great space and great rooms. But what commitment is there to make sure that we have the teachers and the administrators necessary to support that infrastructure and building and to really help our students? And is there a paired commitment from the administration that will have the inside of the building, as in the personnel and the people needed, to be as beautiful and as wonderful and as sufficient as the outside of the building?
Sure, a couple of thoughts. First of all, it's not just the administration that's supporting this. Of course, the council with the $1.2 million loan authorization.
But the administration writes the budget that determines teachers, so that's why I'm concerned.
Well, I want to address your first point, which is it's not just the administration that supports this project. It's the council, as I just said. It's also the school committee who unanimously supported the feasibility study. So I guess my point is we're all on board with this.
Yes.
So where this feasibility study takes us is entirely up to the district. And that's, as I said, up to the SBC, which has members of the school committee on it, school administration on it. If during that schematic, that design, it's decided by the SBC that, you know what, this is what we can get by with, whatever this is, or this is what we want, whatever that is. So really, it's up to the district through the SBC to decide the scope of this project. So before you can say, will you commit to increasing the education budget if you're going to have pretty building or whatever, however you phrased it? I think it's important to recognize that right now we have a blank slate. It's really up to us as to what we want to do at that high school. So it's hard to answer that question because we might not have to go to a completely new high school or a completely renovated high school. It's really up to the SBC through the district as to what we want this high school renovation project to look like.
I guess I think it would be easy for the administration and the director of budget to say, when moving forward, we would want to adequately staff the education department. And especially if we're making the building bigger and we're anticipating more students. You know, we just heard from parents saying that they have a physical education class of 75 students. Clearly, that would not be appropriate to have if we move forward and we invest our money and our goodwill and all of our hard work into beautiful infrastructure, to not have the manpower or the human power to support that. And I would just like the administration's kind of commitment that going forward, those two items would be paired together and thought of as complementary things.
Well, I think you have the commitment of the administration with the $1.8 million above net school spending that we saw in FY17. But beyond that, nobody has said that this project is going to make the high school bigger, and certainly no one has said that the enrollment is expected to increase dramatically. In fact, the opposite is true. As part of the MSBA project, we had to do an enrollment study. So enrollment is not, the build-out of this project is based upon what MSBA has approved to be our projected enrollment. So it's not gonna go up dramatically. Anybody else? Good. Moving on now to free cash and retained earnings. Free cash, we're awaiting certification. We don't know what it is yet. The auditor is working on it. However, having said that, we do have a preliminary list of items that we would like to see addressed once free cash is certified. Now, maybe not all these things can be addressed, but I think I think the mayor thinks it's important that you be aware of these items to see if, you know, you share those same feelings. There are required paybacks to the stabilization fund, as well as school-related capital projects that are designed to reduce maintenance and energy expenses for the school's operating budget. So that was kind of our philosophy going into this. Things that needed to be paid back to the stabilization fund, and things that we believe, working with the schools, would result in some relief to the school's operating budget through capital projects. First, the things that have to be paid back. The FY16 snow deficit of $514,370. Second, the FY15 snow deficit installment number 2 of 3. If you remember, we did the amortization. That's $444,756.37. What we'd also like to do is pay off installment number 3, and that's $368,036.60. We think that would be prudent. Next, we have a cash reserve policy that we've been adhering to ever since the council adopted this policy of $282,000 annually to the stabilization fund. We'd like to continue that as well. Next, we'd like to replace the Hyman Fine and Hill Roberts boilers at a total cost of $400,000. Again, this is geared towards freeing up or saving maintenance and energy costs. That can be found on pages 23, 97, and 99 of the CIP. Next is the Hill Roberts AC units. There's 6 of them. 2 of them really need to be replaced at a cost of $120,000. That can be found on page 23 and 97 of the CIP. Next is the Studley facade at the entryway. That's on page 99 of the CIP, and that's $30,000. Next, Brennan and Wamsutter hot water boilers, which is on pages 103 and 104 of the CIP, for $120,000. Next, Brennan and Wamsutter temporary roof repairs of $40,000. And the reason I say temporary, because we need to submit a statement of interest in the spring when the schools turn 20 years old. And hopefully that statement of interest is approved by your honorable body and the school committee and the MSBA. If so, we can get some quotes to finally fix the roofs at the Wamsutter and Brennan middle schools. So that's $40,000. Next is the Willett,
Is that each? That's each, $40,000 each for each school?
no,
Or
total,
altogether?
20
Total.
each.
Okay.
Next is the Willett Elementary School boiler for $125,000. The Willett Media Center AC unit for $60,000. I knew that would result in that.
I was gonna ask that next too.
Next, so moving away from the school projects, next would be the fire department's Jaws of Life for engines 1 and 2, which need replacing. That's $67,872, and those are on pages 21 and 33 of the CIP. And finally, Briggs Pool to fix a leak in one of the returns, which is $17,500. So the total of those is $2.589 million. Again, we don't know what free cash is going to be. If it's less than that, not all these things can happen. If it's more than that, then they can. The stabilization fund, once those paybacks are made, will have $3.563 million in there, which is what the bond rating companies want to see. There are other needs from free cash or retained earnings. We have Sonny Almeida, who's been here 57 years. When an exempt employee retires, they are owed sick time, their accumulated sick time and vacation time. He's been here so long, he's accumulated 178 sick days and 45 vacation days, and the cost for that is $31,341.
We've seen that in other employees that
Oh,
have
yeah.
left, though. I think
Yeah.
Bozia had a
Chief
high
Churchill was the
one.
last one I remember that
Yeah.
was that big.
I think Bozia had a high one too.
Yeah.
Jeremy and Heather?
Yeah, so if I recall correctly, before the budget was introduced, we knew that Mr. Walsh was going to take that position, so we knew Mr. Almeida was going to retire. I guess my question is why wasn't that amount budgeted?
Sure, that's a great question. And one of the reasons is primarily for this budget is that obviously we had a lot of cutting to do in this budget to make up for the $800,000 that the mayor appropriated over to the school. We believe that since Mr. Almeida was not retiring until a time certain, which is December 31st, we would have ample funds available in free cash to pay that. If we had budgeted it, that would have taken up $31,000 of capacity that we would have had to have cut somewhere else. So we thought for this one-time outlay, it made more sense to identify a funding source since we knew it was going to be after free cash was certified. So that was a good question, but that was the thought
good
behind
answer.
it.
And that we currently have business in front of us with regards to that, that it's being paid out of reserve fund for transfer.
Oh, you did? Okay, he already sent it down?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it was in my committee, it was last week.
Oh, good.
We spoke about it last
Yeah,
night.
and I am still under the impression that we were hustling around towards the end of the year, putting our budget together, you know.
I actually asked Councilor Blair the question that Jeremy asked.
I'm sorry,
you
I
just
didn't know
now.
it was down.
That's okay, no, that's fine. That was the exact question that I asked Councilor Blair
Okay,
about
all right.
that, but that didn't come out. So I guess then my follow-up question would be, would we refund the reserve fund for transfer?
No, it wouldn't be necessary. I'm just saying that's, the free cash was an identifiable funding source for
Okay.
Sunny's payout.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Cook?
Thank you. Yeah, that had come down, the last regular meeting, and the amount, in case, the amount was, I just want to make sure you have it, it was $31,314.56.
I have 341, but I may have transposed those numbers. It's quite possible. I was working on this late. the other
Okay.
night.
I just want to make sure that you had it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, a couple other things is, we'll be needing a little bit of interest on temporary borrowing for the school department, $3,700. Some interest on temporary borrowing for the water of about $15,000. And then one of the things that we want to use retained earnings in the water department once it's certified is to replace one of the 4 high lift pumps at the West Street pumping station. The high lift pumps are the things that pump the water out, and one of them is not operating, so that's $65,000. So I think that would be a good use of retained earnings. Moving on to FY18 budget. We have, when I say we, the mayor and I have a meeting regularly with not only Superintendent Sawyer, but Chairman Withers. These meetings have been designed to be collaborative, and are used to update each other on significant issues, such as the capital items I just talked about for the school department. They've been very constructive. We're gonna continue them. Very constructive, very good. And they're gonna become even more valuable as the school committee moves into FY18 a little sooner than we do. Having said that, I understand there was some angst with the date that the budget came down for FY17. I understand that, so I thought I'd do a little bit of research to see, gee, how late, how early, what's the average that the budget has been sent down to the council? So I went back 27 years. And the interesting data is that the earliest the budget has ever been sent down to the council during that 27-year period is May 1st. And that was on May 1st of 1990. And that was for FY91. The latest was June 5th, 09. That was for fiscal year 10. But most submissions of the budget to the council, 48%, occur between May 18th and May 31st, which is kind of where ours landed for FY17. Having said that, I understand that you'd like it earlier. The risk, and we're gonna use our best efforts to do that. The risk you run, that we all run, is that we don't have a final number for Chapter 70. We don't have a final number for unrestricted local aid. We don't have a final number for assessments from the state. So that, because the cherry sheets are always changing. We get the budget from the governor January. We got House Ways and Means, we got Senate Ways and Means, we got, we keep getting cherry sheets. But we are gonna use our best efforts to get it down earlier for FY18, but I wanted you to be aware that the risk we run is that we're not gonna have the final numbers, and we're gonna have to shore up at some point after the budget is approved to reflect the final cherry sheet numbers. And if you all can acknowledge that, then we'll do our best to get it down earlier.
Jeremy?
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I think we all would like it earlier, but I would state that I don't think it's fair to look back and say what the average date was, because we're asking for an appropriate dates, because we're tasked with going through the budget and making cuts or not making cuts and doing all that stuff. It's like saying the average person steals $3,000 in their life, but that's not appropriate. What would be appropriate is to steal $0 in your life. So while the average time might have been, late May, early June, like what's appropriate, I think we're asking is early May, and maybe look at it through that lens rather than, the past isn't always pretense. Maybe the past was never actually the appropriate time, and that's a change that the administration can make. So I appreciate you saying that you will make that effort to kind of try and get it down earlier.
Yeah, and again, my point was not to suggest anything other than history does tell a story, and that's the story I was trying to tell, so.
I also have a history degree. Frank?
Along that line, as a history degree, I think it is appropriate, with all due respect, to provide that information, because we had a person come to this podium a few weeks ago and announced that this was the latest that a budget ever been brought down. And I know, sitting here myself, there have been numerous times. I remember being here in June. The June 5th was actually a Friday night. We had to call a special meeting on a Friday night. So again, it's important to keep a lot of these things in perspective. And obviously, the sooner we can get the budget, the better off we will be. However, we can't ignore the fact that historically, this is the average date when it's come down, but at the same time, it has come down a lot later than it was alleged, that this being the latest time ever that it had come down, so.
And again, I think really the point of my bringing up this statistical data and to acknowledge that we're gonna use our best efforts to get it done earlier is just the acknowledgement from the council that when we come down after July 1st and say, listen, folks, we need to shore up. Chapter 70 came in less than expected. Unrestricted local aid came in less than expected. Whatever it is, I want you all to understand that's why we did it. That's why we're shoring up, because we didn't have the latest cherry sheet when we sent down the budget, because we sent it down a little earlier. That's all I'm trying to get across.
Thank you, and I think as Frank said, for clarification, it was good clarification.
Yeah.
Someone makes a statement.
Yep.
So, okay.
You know what, I've spoken for a long time, and I apologize for going over, but that's my update.
No, thank you. I know you're here in City Hall every day, and I know you're a hard worker, Barry, so I do appreciate it. Every time I call, email, anything, I go to your office, you have an open door, and I do appreciate that. So thank you.
Anytime.
Mr. Delicia?
Thank you. It's an awful lot of information. Is it possible to get a recap to Ken? Your presentation?
I can try to, a lot of these are just my cryptic notes, so.
Doesn't need to be tomorrow, but if you could, just because it's an awful lot of information. So, thank you.
And then we can think about the next date too. I know
Yeah,
you have a
of
lot
course.
on your plate, but kind of also see another date. And I know one thing I've learned even being in this chair is I can't make everybody happy. So I'm just giving
Really?
my best. And as Frank said, looking at, he's been the previous chair. So I do appreciate everything. I know I always say, I tease you and say, I know I'm a pain in the neck sometimes because I'm like, da, da, da. But I know you have a lot on your plate. So
That's all right. I
appreciate-
don't mind the questions, I don't mind the emails, the text message, whatever it is, I don't mind at all.
Thank you. Jeremy?
So moving forward, I think everyone had difficulty with this year's budget. It wasn't fun for you guys, wasn't fun for us. So looking at next year, is the administration kind of putting a plan in place, knowing it might be difficult, but maybe trying to prioritize human capital within the city so that we don't possibly see the number of layoffs that we saw this year? Is that something we're already looking at? Is there something that this council could do to help assist you in that? I think I'll just speak for myself. For myself, it was the the number of layoffs that was so biting and so damaging. And is there a way that we could help you, or are you already on top of that and you're looking towards a 2018 fiscal year with no layoffs, or
Well,
is that impossible?
Well, I think what I can say is that anytime there is a vacancy, for example, anytime someone retires, we take a very hard look at that position and decide at that point, can we spread those tasks to other people so that we can realign or re-examine a position. So that's what we do on an ongoing basis anyways. Looking forward, you know, we're starting the FY18 budget right now. You know, I am internally, right? But, you know, I get retirement numbers, things like that I start putting into my FY18 folder. So certainly, nobody wants a budget process like we had in FY17. I don't think that was fun for anybody. There was a lot of misinformation out there, and a lot of responses that we need to come up with to, you know, combat that. So nobody wants any of that. So, and it was, you know, some of it was constructive, and some of it wasn't constructive. We hope we can avoid that this year, FY18. And that's why I think that you have at least my commitment to try and use our best efforts to get it down earlier.
Thank you.
Thank you. Heather?
Thank you very much. We had a conversation after the budget this year, and I think that you and I both agreed that we all learned a lot of different lessons, that moving forward we can, you know, try not to repeat. And there were a lot of valuable lessons, and I think that as a group, as we move forward, we've had the conversation on the council floor that, you know, regular meetings, that not a lot of scheduling changes, being able to have executive sessions when necessary, to have conversation about the budget that could be sensitive. All of those different kinds of things would help add to a more conducive, more polite budget period. And I think that with you working on it now internally and figuring those kinds of things out, and us knowing what we need to bring to the table from what we learned this last time, this was our conversation. We both hope that this next process is better and streamlined. I get the whole, you know, middle of May, bringing the budget down at that time. And I think that, again, it's just that having the meetings, attending the meetings, making sure everyone knows what's going on, and being completely upfront with our questions. It's kind of hard to identify what questions to ask initially. So some of the newer councilors, myself, I mean, this is my third budget season, to learn what questions and to ask at the right time and to have that information. That was a huge deal. And hopefully we don't have a lot of repetitive.
And it was for us too. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I think I attended every budget meeting with the department head. I think I attended every single one. And I don't expect, I've sat where you sit, and I don't expect you to know everything about the budget. I know that sometimes you don't know what questions to ask. But, you know, again, as Councilor Hegney said, my door is always open, my email is always available, if you do have a question. I think what we want to do is obviously, we expect you to do your job and to go through the budget line by line and to make cuts where you think it's appropriate. But is there anything wrong with talking about those cuts ahead of time so that at least the administration can get ahead of those and say, well, that's your decision, just so you know this is what the logical consequences are, and at the end of that conversation, it's thank you, but we're doing it anyways. Is there anything wrong with that? You know?
OPEB.
What's that?
OPEB.
OPEB.
Okay.
That's a good example.
Right.
You know, and so, you know, talking about open dialogue and two-way street and all that, I think is always a good thing. And again, you have that power to cut. Nobody disagrees with that. And if at the end of that dialogue, your decision is, we're still gonna cut it, okay, all right. I mean, that's your prerogative.
And that's a good point too, because I don't regret a certain vote, but maybe the naivety, I've never been naive sitting on the council to think that funds cut would be reappropriated back down. It's also the administration's purview not to reappropriate the money that might have been cut too.
Right. Yeah,
And that's what we also have to understand, is when we cut it, it's cut.
Right.
Mr. Cooper?
Thank you. I think, since we're talking about the fiscal year 18 budget. I think I've said it before, I'll say it again, and I don't need an update at this time, but I think it's important to have some type of financial advisor to the council. It's in the budget, it has been, we've been without it. Some would argue both sides of the value of that and having that, but I think that we've had it, perhaps that contributed to some of this year in the absence of it. I don't know, I can't validate that, but I think it's, we've talked about it, we've made the point, I've said it a couple of times. I know we've had, little discussion about it, but I think again, if we are talking about 18, now's the time to do it, not thinking about it again in February or March when all the people that would potentially entertain doing that are busy doing other things that come due on April 15th, right? So let's talk about it now and figure out what we're gonna do. We don't have to do it right now tonight, I'm just putting it out there.
Okay, and it's out there, so if anyone does want, and I've actually been criticized for supporting such a move, to have that person come back, cause I liked, not necessarily the person, but the position. They can look at things differently in a perspective that they work for us on the council. So I do agree with you, so. Anyone else?
Thank you very much, Madam
Thank you,
Chairman.
Barry. Thank you very much, I do appreciate everything. Thank
Anytime.
you. Okay, and I did hand out, the handout for the school department appropriation this evening. I had talked to Mr. Furtado. I know I wanted a breakdown, and I'm sure other counselors would like to know what the total for the $50,335.20 was. And for that, you, can see how we set down the spreadsheet. And for the first part, for the sped, is $36,986.75, and you can see Boston Gossi High School March tuition payment. Most of these are clerical errors that were payments that were supposed to be put out but inputted wrong, so now we have to pay those previous bills. But you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and because of where we are obligated to make those payments for the sped, and then we see the homeless transportation, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at $5,605.50, and then we see the subtotals for the schools. There was 3 custodial fees, and then we have an advisor's stipend that they never filed their paperwork, so we have to make sure they get paid. Another advisor stipend, they never filed their paperwork, so we have to make sure. Something the principal ordered, so he didn't enter a purchase order, so that was something for signs by tomorrow. I don't know what that was a payment for, but that is something we have to pay. And then on the next page, you can see that's professional development, the pro dev, for the subtotal of $2,636.03. There's 2 of those, Naviance, that's professional development. The next 2 is $539, and that is a payroll, 2 of them are payroll. And the last one is for the copy center, $65.99. So he did break those down, and I think going over them is self-explanatory now. Okay, any other questions? Discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed, motion passes. For the next motion, I entertain a motion to approve the mayor's request to approve a supplemental appropriation of $1,545.40 to account A2325010-511200 school department teacher sub professional salary.
Second.
Thank you. This one is for Counselor Denley. He had gone through the appropriate channel, signed his waiver, I should say, you want to call it that, from the legal opinion, and I thought it would be prudent to transfer over that money. Any other comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. I make a motion to adjourn at 7:46.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, we are adjourned. 7:46.
you.
This Naviance is, oh, it's awesome. So it's a,
Professional counsel.